In what ways does your media product use, develop, or challenge forms and conventions of real media products? Our film opening uses the genre conventions of horror films in different ways throughout the film opening. Firstly, our location choice, the woods, is usually associated with horror films and is a commonly used setting for horror or mystery films. Even though our film is only 2 minutes long, we started the film outside of the main location for the film, which was the woods. As we found from our research, this is a common theme among many horror films. For example, the Blair Witch Project, a film based in the woods, starts with all the main characters outside of the woods and in suburban built-up areas. Therefore, in our film, we decided to start on the road nearby the woods to show the transition into the creepy area. This is useful as it creates disparity between the safe feeling of civilized land and the more eerie feeling of being trapped in the woods. This is a fear we wanted to utilize and expose in our film. This was due to the fact that our research showed that films like the Blair Witch Project are popular with people of our target audience, as the fear of being trapped is very common among 16 to 24-year-olds, and we wanted to exploit this as much as we could. We also followed common conventions of the graphology and colouring of horror films throughout our film. The colour scheme we use is a very common colour scheme, mostly unique to horror films. This mainly consisted of red and blacks and dark colours. These colours are very, very dark and gloomy and suggest impending danger to the viewer. The colour red was our primary colour for the font, as it is commonly associated with danger, and as we found from our research, is a common convention related to blood and death. We also used a creepy font which looked like smeared blood to create a creepy feeling and tension about upcoming events in the film and simulate that death would be approaching or foreshadowing. This is a common genre convention for horror films and was utilised in such films as Dawn of the Dead 2004, World War Z and the Blair Witch Project. We also used an unhuman-like character as our antagonist for our film, which is also a common convention of horror films such as Paranormal Activity and all its sequels. This is used to create suspicion about the character's background and possible motives towards the protagonist of our film. We also use costumes, which are genre conventions of horror, for our protagonist and our antagonist. Our protagonist wears normal clothes associated with our target audience's age group. When researching for our film, we found that nearly all horror films have their protagonist wearing very normal civilian clothes, so that the viewer can relate to the character as a normal person. However, this person is in a nightmarish position, which makes the audience feel like it could be them in this position. Our antagonist wears dark, unique clothing to differentiate himself from the normal people in the film. This is also used in a lot of horror films, as this allows people's fears to be visualized on screen and gives viewers a scared thrill watching the mysterious character. One development of a common horror genre convention was our use of a jump scare. A jump scare is a technique often used in horror films and video games intended to scare the audience by surprising them with an abrupt change in image or event, usually co-occurring with a loud, frightening sound. However, in our horror film, we developed this technique by two main differences. One development is that we used the jump scare relatively early on in the film, whereas most horror films have their jump scares nearer the end of the movie as a dramatic reveal of their mysterious character. We decided to use this technique early on to create suspense that it could be repeated without prior knowledge for the viewer, compared to most horror films where they lead up to it and build suspense through the entire film to the point where you can kind of expect the jump scare. This creates tension all throughout the film and keeps viewers on edge, which we thought was an important aim that our film opening needed to establish. We also decided to use a medium range shot instead of a close-up shot for the jump scare itself. Most jump scares show the entire face of the antagonist in frame in an extreme close-up shot that appears briefly and abruptly to make people jump as they are not expecting it. However, we decided to use a medium shot as we wanted to keep our villain's identity somewhat mysterious instead of revealing his entire face early on throughout the film. A common convention we decided to challenge was our use of lighting. We decided to film in daylight, although it was a low light as opposed to an extreme bright sunlight, which is not a commonly used theme throughout horror films such as Paranormal Activity. These films utilize a not seeing, not knowing fear, which means that dark lighting, for example nighttime, is very important for these films to establish their horror. However, we decided to challenge this and set our film in the daylight. We decided to use this technique to make the fear seem more prevalent. Many people are more scared in dark situations, however, we felt that this was an overused technique by many horror films. So to differentiate our film from these, we filmed in daylight, which we feel would make the fear seem different and as if it can happen anywhere, anytime, and keep the viewers on edge. How does your media product represent particular social groups? Our film represents teenagers, as our casting in the film contains teenagers. Our target audience for our film is teenagers and young adults, therefore having teenagers aged 17 featuring in our film makes the film feel more relatable to the target audience we're trying to appeal to. Having characters that wear common clothes that young people currently wear also appeals to a broad group of young people. We've also done this through dialogue spoken between the two young characters. The dialogue is quite informal yet understandable and allows the film to be relatable and realistic to an extent. The location used also represents a common fear among many young people, which is the fear of being stranded alone. Our location also represents middle-class people, as it is shot near big houses and takes place in a nice, fairly well looked after woods. Our media product represents different classes throughout our film. For example, we use specific clothes which represent middle-class teenagers. Our clothes design was based off a very stereotypical image associated to middle-class 16 to 24-year-olds. This appeals to the widest demographic possible, and our actors are also middle class, which will align with our use of clothing and location to appeal to the widest range of people that we can. However, we didn't represent all social groups through the use of gender, as our actors are all male and therefore represent a male-orientated audience. Our lack of female characters may negatively affect our film, as it shows lack of representation for the other gender, which is a negative point about our film. However, we do encompass a large range of our target audience. What kind of media institution would distribute your media product and why? One media institution that may distribute our film is Artisan Entertainment, because they were the distributors for The Blair Witch Project, which is a low-budget horror film which appeals to the same target audience that we are targeting. Artisan Entertainment also produced Blair Witch Project 2, which is a similar film to our own. They attracted their audience through viral marketing schemes which are commonly well received by a younger audience of 17 to 24, which is very useful for building up anticipation for the film among a specific audience, in this case 17 to 24-year-olds. Another distributor of horror films or TV shows is Netflix. Netflix make original horror and thriller TV shows like Stranger Things that had critical acclaim among young viewers and all viewers. Netflix is also widely popular amongst the younger audience, which is the same audience we would want to attract. Video-on-demand services have also increased viewers' willingness to watch films they may not have thought about watching, as they do not have to pay to watch individual films like the traditional way of watching films was. This is a major benefit to us, as our film is not part of an already recognised film trilogy, and therefore would not be recognisable to our target audience at first. We would rely partially on viewers who are already interested in the horror genre to watch our film out of pure speculation, as they do not have any prior knowledge of our films to affect their decision making. Who would be the audience for your media product? The audience for our media product will be young people aged from 17 to 24. This is because this age group is most likely to watch horror films. We found this information from our research. We decided to make our horror film less gruesome than most, as to appeal to a wider range of people. Making the film contain less violence and gore whilst remaining scary appeals to a much wider demographic in comparison with viewers who exclusively like gore and blood in horror films. We also made our film less violent to appeal to a middle-class people, as upper-class people are seen as less likely to watch a disgusting horror film. We appealed to this audience throughout the film. For example, we used specific clothes, we represented middle-class teenagers, and we also used a middle-class location. Our clothes design was based off a very stereotypical image associated to the middle-class 17 to 24-year-olds. This appeals to the widest demographic possible. Our actors are also middle class, which will align with our use of clothing and location to appeal to the widest range of the public that we can. How did you attract and address your audience? Our film attracts viewers through the first scene. Our first scene starts with our characters approaching mysterious woods and allows audiences to be engaged with the film very quickly, as there is a quick transition into the forest. Having the film transition into the creepy woods quickly means that the audience is engrossed in the film from the very start. Having a quick start to a film keeps the audience's attention with the film as they ask questions and are inquisitive about the scenario regarding the characters. We try to attract our audience by using actors who are similar ages to our target audience. Our target audience for the film is teenagers and young adults, therefore having teenagers aged 17 featured in our film makes the film feel relatable to the target audience. Having characters that wear common clothes that young people currently wear appeals to a broad group of young people. We have also done this through the use of dialogue spoken between the two young characters. The dialogue is quite informal yet understandable and allows the film to be relatable and realistic to an extent. The location used also represents a common fear among many young people, which is the fear of being stranded alone. What have you learned about technologies from the process of constructing this product? I have learnt a lot about different technologies throughout this process. For example, I learnt a lot about Blogger. Blogger was the website which I used to publish all my research, planning and evaluation information. Before beginning this process, I had never used a blogging website before, and therefore knew next to nothing about how to make the website look good and accessible. Throughout this process, I managed to make my blog look more professional and publish all my information in an easy to access, readable view that made my blog look more professional, and the layout was much more informative and easy to read. Throughout this project, I also learned a lot about video editing and layers. The process of editing the film together required many video layers to be used in the editing software, which posed a challenge when trying to put the whole film together at the end. I learned a lot about the way in which a film should be constructed bit by bit whilst making this product. The overall planning for the film covered some of the editing techniques we wanted to use, but when it came to editing the whole film together, it was challenging to fit them all in whilst creating a cinematic theme and experience which did not feel gimmicky. I have also learned a lot about how to use editing strategically to create suspense and build up momentum for a scene with the use of editing. Looking back at your preliminary task, what do you feel you have learned in the progression from it to the full product? Looking back at our preliminary task, I feel we learnt a lot about the planning and construction of producing a 2-minute film introduction. In our preliminary task, we had very little planning and research going into the task, which meant that our genre was not portrayed in a convincing way. However, with our full product, our genre was much more obvious, and we also used many more genre conventions to portray this. Having the ability to research our genre before planning or even filming our film allowed us to evaluate the specific genre conventions that may be necessary to our film. When entering into our project, we had much more advice on what to use and what not to use and how to target a specific audience. However, our preliminary task lacked this massively, as we had no clear audience and we were not selling the film to anyone, and there was no idea surrounding the distribution of the film and who would actually watch our film. Our preliminary task was also edited with different software to what we used when editing our full product. This software was not as good and therefore didn't allow us to do as many unique edits and make a cinematic theme, which we hope we portrayed better in our product whilst using the different editing software. The reason we used the editing software was because it was more accessible and allowed us to use more layers easily.